Welcome back to the daily Living Jewish Kitzur Shulchan Aruch class. Today we begin section 63 of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, continuing the mitzvah, the prohibition, the negative command of Aidah. With words is not limited to business transactions, but applies to the way we communicate as well. Were you able to hear me? My computer froze up a little bit.
Yeah, you went off air. I thought it was my internet.
No, I think it was on my side. So just to repeat, there's a mitzvah in the Torah that says, Al Toidu Ish es Abisai, one should not do Aida'a to a friend. It's very hard to translate the word Aida'a. Aida'a, simply translated, is not to mislead. And we spoke about by not overcharging or underpaying, or by not making the produce look like it's better than it is. Those were all examples of Aida'a. But Aida'a is not only not to mislead in business, there's a separate mitzvah which is not to mislead in communications, in the way that we talk to each other. My computer is still frozen. Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm just waiting for it to unfreeze so that we'll be able to continue. And maybe this is it. So, yeah. So Aidah is also in the way we communicate with each other. So it wouldn't only be not to mislead, which is also in communications, but it also means not to slight somebody, not to cause somebody pain or damage. Let's run through it. It's a fairly short section, but a very important section. Let's take a look at section 63. Just as it is forbidden to deceive a person by dishonest buying and selling, so is it forbidden to deceive a person with words. As the Torah says, you shall not deceive one another, but you shall fear your God. This refers to deception done by means of words. Now, the sin of deceiving with words is worse than deceiving with money, believe it or not. In a certain regard, it's worse to deceive somebody when there's no financial loss than to deceive somebody when there is financial loss. Why so? Because when there is financial loss, you could see exactly what the loss was, and you can return that. But when the misleading was not is not measurable in finances, it doesn't total a certain value, then you're never going to be able to pay it back. You can never pay back for pain inflicted through misleading a person with words. That's one difference. Restitution. Secondly, monetary deception only affects the person's finances, whereas hurtful or insulting remarks are aimed at the person himself. Thirdly, anyone who cries to Hashem because of wrong done to him with words is answered immediately. And finally, says the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the person must be particularly careful not to hurt his wife's feelings and not to cause her pain with harsh words, for a woman is sensitive by nature, and even a slight hurt will bring tears to her eyes, and Hashem, blessed be He, pays heed to tears, for the gates of tears are never closed. So a person needs to be, as they say, charity starts at home, and all types of mitzvahs start at home. When we talk about not being hurtful with words, first and foremost, we need to be sure that we are not hurtful to our very own spouse, or to our wife in particular, as women are more sensitive by nature. So what are examples of hurting with words? There's a number of different examples. The first is, if you go over to somebody and you say, how much will you sell me the article for? When you have no intention to buy it. Okay, you walk into a store and you say, how much is this worth? And the guy thinks that he's about to get a deal. And he has no idea that you have no intention to buy it. As long as you're thinking of buying it, then by all means, he wants you to ask because maybe you'll get it. He wants you to engage. But if you have no intention in purchasing the item and you start asking how much it's worth, that's actually being hurtful to the person with words because you're deceiving him. He thinks that he's got what to work with over here. He's got a transaction ahead of him, and he doesn't know that you're just having fun or you're just asking as a matter of interest. Or to somebody who wishes to buy grain, don't say, go speak to so-and-so, knowing full well that this person has no grain to sell. Okay, that would be pretty nasty. Somebody asks you, where can I find this? Yeah, I think Pick and Pay Norwood has it, but it doesn't. And you're just taking the person for a ride. Don't know who would do that. A third example, which sometimes could happen and one needs to be very careful, if one's friend is a Baal Tshuva, one should not say to him, remember what you used to do in the past? People sometimes do this. They have an inferiority complex where they feel that this other guy that's changed his life around is now better than them. And in order to make themselves feel better, they say to the guy, yeah, I know you. We were in school together. I remember what kind of trouble you got up to together. And the person that's saying it is doing it in order to, because he feels like the guy that did Teshuvah, the guy that became a Baal Teshuvah, is now higher than him. And he thinks that the way that he could resolve that is by pulling the person down. So with those words, those aren't deceptive words, but they are certainly damaging words. They're words of slight. They're words of pain. And that's why Aidah doesn't only mean deception, but it means really any form of hurt that's inflicted upon the other party. And in this case, through words. Another example is somebody is suffering. Chas v'shalom. One should not speak to him like Eob's friend spoke to Eob, who said, is not your fear of God your confidence? Remember, I pray you, whoever perished being innocent. They spoke to him this way because he rebelled against Hashem's attributes of justice. In other words, if somebody is suffering, don't say to him, yeah, maybe you've done something wrong. The person should never excuse another person's suffering, and certainly not to the person themselves. Finally, if someone is asked a scholarly question, don't turn to somebody who has no knowledge of it and say, what do you say? How would you answer that question? We're not talking about a teacher that just wants to engage students by asking them to share whatever's on their mind. We're talking about asking a scholarly question to somebody that you know does not have the answer. So in all these situations, a person causes heartache, a person causes pain to the other person. These are all examples of a nas dvarim, either deceiving a person through words or causing a person pain through words. Nicknames. If a person has a humiliating nickname, although he's used to be calling this, and he's not even embarrassed by it, but it's the kind of nickname that if someone wants to humiliate him, if the intention of calling him the nickname is in order to humiliate him, then you cannot call him by that nickname, because this means that you're being hurtful towards him. In general, nicknames should be avoided. So I think maybe differentiate between if a person has a way that he's called, I don't think that's what we mean by nicknames. If somebody's name is Yosef and they're called Yossi, that's not what we're referring to. They call him Yossi if that's how he's called. But if a guy's name is Yosef and he has a nickname, I don't know, JC or something, and that's what everybody calls him, then one should avoid it. Even if the guy's used to it, it could still be hurtful. It could be that he doesn't like it and he just doesn't know what to say about it. This is particularly relevant amongst children, but adults need to be careful of that as well. Here's another interesting one. It is forbidden to mislead anyone, even though there's no monetary loss. Even if he's a non-Jew, there's no difference over here. Even as in, You might think there's a difference, but there isn't. Meaning, what are examples of this? It is forbidden to sell a non-Jew, non-kosher meat under the false pretense that it's kosher. So you're a kosher butchery, and you have some meat that you discover is not kosher. But just then, luckily enough, Johan walks into the store, and Johan says, "Can I get a piece of some kosher meat?" Now, between me and you, he's not getting any greater portion of the world to come. He's not getting any bigger heaven by eating kosher meat over non-kosher meat, because he has no mitzvah to keep kosher. So you have nothing to lose by giving him non-kosher. It's not going to cause any spiritual difference to him. But if he's asking for kosher meat, you have to give him kosher meat. You can't give him non-kosher meat. Even though there's no monetary loss, there's no spiritual loss, it's still deception, and it is not allowed. Or another example, if a person sells an article that has an imperfection, even though that doesn't make it change its value, he needs to inform the person of it. So, I mean, I'm just thinking today, I'm looking now to sell a car, and I just met up with a potential buyer, and we discussed and negotiated, and perhaps we'll continue those negotiations, but I'm not sure if I disclosed everything. I don't know if I disclosed that there's this particular issue or that issue. So even if it's not going to change the value of the car, even though these little things, the car is worth the same thing, if there is some kind of defect, then you have a requirement to disclose it. So we know that you need to disclose defects that cause monetary change of value. But today we know that one also needs to disclose defects even if they don't have any financial consequence. Because this is part of included in the prohibition of einas dvarim, not to deceive a person with words, even when there is no financial effect. Finally, this is quite an interesting one. Don't invite somebody for a meal when you know he won't accept it. Okay, so that could be a little tricky. Let's talk about that for a moment. So, if you know somebody is not going to accept it, you can't invite him. So the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, he explains like this. He says, if you're not inviting him because you know he won't accept it. Rather, you're inviting him and you're hoping he will accept it. Even if you know for a fact that he won't, then that's fine. It's not deceptive. Since from your side, you genuinely want him to come. As opposed to inviting him because you know he won't accept it. So let's give a practical example. If you're planning a wedding, and because of COVID restrictions, you can only invite 100 people. Okay. So, but you would love to invite additional people. So you wouldn't be allowed to send out additional invitations to people that if you knew they were coming, you wouldn't invite them because you don't have place for them. But since you know that they're out of town, you'll invite them. And that way, they'll feel honored. And it won't be a problem because they're not coming either way. That's not allowed. So you're not allowed to invite somebody if the reason you're inviting them is because you know they're going to decline. But if you're inviting them and you know they'll decline, but if they wouldn't be declining, you would be inviting them the very same way that the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, in the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Yadi, in his halachic work says that you would be allowed to invite. That's not considered deceptive. Okay, but this is still an important point. If you see somebody and you're inviting them to join you for a meal, you need to ask yourself, am I being genuine or is this deceptive? Or am I inviting him because I know he's not going to accept it? So I need to be sure that it is, hopefully it would be the fall. Hopefully you would want to have everybody over that you invite. That there's no Jew that you wouldn't want to have by your simcha. But one needs to be bear this in mind as well. The Shulchan Aruch also does speak about, when I say the Shulchan Aruch, this is the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, it's the abridged version. In the full version, it does also speak about sometimes if a person is some form of dignitary, there's an idea of inviting just because one is required to show honor, even if one doesn't really want the person to join. And that would also be allowed. It would be under a different context of showing honor that is necessary to be shown. So that would kind of be like a scenario where where this dignitary would basically, if he was honest, would tell you, yeah, I know you don't want me to come, but it's most appropriate that you invite me because of that. So you would be allowed to invite such a person out of honor. But generally, interactions between people, if you're inviting somebody over, you need to make sure that you're genuine and you're not just inviting them because you know that they will decline the invitation. I'm going to give a few other practical examples of this. Another one is, don't offer a gift when you're sure that the person won't accept it. Oh, you want to welcome, you're welcome to stay in my home, you're welcome to borrow my car, whatever you want, it's all yours. When really it's not all yours, but you just know that they're not going to accept it. That is a biblical prohibition of a na'as dvarim. You're tricking through words. Okay. In all these scenarios, a person says one thing, but in his heart, he doesn't mean it. Or as when he pretends to show respect to someone, but this doesn't reflect his true feelings. Such conduct is forbidden. Your mouth and your heart should always be in perfect agreement. Piv v'liboy shavin. One needs to ensure that what goes on in one's heart is what goes on in one's mouth. And it shouldn't, as opposed to false flattery. Another example spoken about, there are a lot of examples of the Shulchan Aruch, is if a guy walks into the store and you're about to open up a new bottle of champagne, a new bottle of whiskey, and as he walks in, you're like, oh, Yankel, come here, let me open this blue label. But you were planning on opening it up anyhow, that's forbidden, because you're deceiving him into thinking that the reason you opened it was because he came, and you were planning on opening it regardless. So that would be another example of this concept of not to mislead a person into thinking that you're doing something for them when really you would be doing it regardless. Just for you, right? And somebody says, this is just for you. One needs to be careful when you say it's just for you. Is it really just for that person, or are you just trying to say something where you don't really mean it? Please God, we all will be careful in ensuring that our hearts are lined up with our mouths and our mouths are lined up with our